Hi, everyone. So we are back to our springboard lessons this week. And this week we're focusing on activity 1.18. So this activity is going to be the focus for the entire week. And you're going to do each part of it with the exception of the very last writing prompt. So the blue box at the end, we are not going to do. We may come back to it next week, but you do not have to do it as part of your work this week. All right, so let's take a look at what we're going to do. We are going to dig deeper into tone and theme. So trying to figure out what is the subject of this story, and then what's the message about that subject that the author wants us to know. And of course, that's the definition of theme. Not only what is the message about that subject, but how does the author or the speaker feel about that subject, which is the definition of tone. So, in order to come to those conclusions about tone and theme, we are going to analyze symbolism. So, the idea that an object can represent something outside of itself while retaining its own identity. Things like flags that represent patriotism or unity in a nation, but are also still just flags, materials with symbols on them. Imagery, so the language, the telling details that are appealing to the senses, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. And then figurative language, so those words and phrases that compare things that are not alike. So comparing one thing in terms of another. Okay? And so by analyzing those things, we will begin to understand the story's tone and theme. In addition, you're going to determine the impact of the author's language choices, so the words and the phrases and the figurative language that the author uses on meaning and tone. Okay, so how does the words that the author chooses influence what you come away understanding to be the meaning and the attitude of the piece? So this last one we are not going to do today or this week. We may come back to it next week. So for this week, you will read a short story and then use what's called the SIFT strategy. So symbol, imagery, figurative language, tone, and theme. So that's what SIFT stands for, to determine what the author is conveying through his literary choices. So just as we've been doing in the past, we're going to practice this literary analysis where we identify the short story, the author, and perhaps the genre, identify the literary devices that the author is using in order to impact a reader, and then identifying what that impact is on the reader or what that message is that the reader is intended to receive. All right, so figuring out theme sometimes involves understanding a little bit of context. So knowing a little bit about the author can help you to start to think about those themes. So this story is written by Ray Bradbury. And while I'm not going to read the whole about the author box to you, I am just going to point out that I've highlighted and underlined a few things that I think might help. So you will read this to yourself, but keep in mind that this writer, Ray Bradbury, and you might have heard of him, he wrote fantasy, horror, science fiction, and mysteries, and really focused on science fiction. So even his horror and his fantasy and his mysteries had an element of science fiction quite often. He was inspired to write by a magician who touched his head when he was 12 with an electrically charged sword and said, "Live forever." So I underlined that thinking, I wonder if this is something that he thinks about a lot, if this kind of idea of living forever kind of propelled him into the science fiction realm, and maybe that has something to do with the message he's trying to get out there. All right, so you should go back and read the about the author paragraph there. So before we start talking about the story itself, I want you to take a look at this picture for just a moment. So I want you to think about, what do you notice in the details? So telling details are not just in writing. Telling details are what communicate, whether it's through visual media or sound like music or writing. So art does communicate messages, and this image right here does communicate a lot with its details. So I see things like mice, but they're not realistic mice. They look like robots. There's a lot of empty space here. But I think the thing that draws my attention the most is what's outside the windows, which is destruction. And it looks like some kind of a dust rising, which makes me think that it's dirty and dusty. I don't see any signs of nature or life outside the window. I also don't see any signs of biological life inside the window. So that's my thought on that. And so thinking about that image, it might help us predict what our story is going to be about. Okay, so this story is called There Will Come Soft Rains. And you'll see that it takes its title from a piece of literature that's referenced in the story itself. I'm not going to read the story to you because it's about 15 minutes long and I do want to keep this brief. So you may want to pause right now and listen to the story on the audio or read it to yourself. And then you can come back and I'm going to go through how to answer the questions and talk about the SIFT chart and how you will do that. That's your assignment for Wednesday. All right, so scrolling down, let's look at the making observations. So as you are reflecting on the story that you read or are going to read, think carefully about who are the characters in the story. Are there characters in this story? There are. And so you, if you already read the story, might be thinking, there were no people. Who are the characters? There are. So think about that, okay? And then what are the details about the setting that stand out to you? Okay? So there are several things about the setting that stand out to me, most notably the year. I noted that it was in the year 2026. So this story is written about a time in the future. And then there are several other very interesting details that tell me about the setting and something about what this story is about that's going to help me understand the theme. All right, so there are 4 returning to the text questions. So you need to know that although I do not go into your Springboard Digital and read every question, I do go in and look, but I don't grade the answers to all of these questions. However, that being said, these questions are the basis for our discussion in this week's synchronous session. So when we meet on Thursday and Friday, possibly even Tuesday, maybe Monday, we will talk about these questions and try to answer them together in small groups and as a class. So please do have these filled out. Have text evidence to support your answer so that we can share these with each other. So you're going to go back to the text and skim and scan to come up with answers. So the first question says, what is the organizational structure of the story? So in other words, what kind of a sequence does it follow? So for example, we read a previous story where there was a flashback used. So it began in the present, and then it flashed back to a time in the past, and then it actually went into the imagination and into the future, and then came back to the present. So how does this story go from beginning to end? Are there jumps forward or backward, or does it have a particular sequencing structure? Okay. So that structure, once you determine what it is, what effect does that have on the story itself. How does that create a feeling within the story? How does it create an expectation in the reader? So what does it do to make the story better or more intense or creepier? And it definitely does. So think about that. Provide evidence from the text to support your response. So providing the evidence of the organizational structure should be easy to do. All right, look at number 2. In the lines, in the living room, the voice clock sang as if it were afraid that nobody would. So what it's going to ask you about, I've underlined a couple of phrases here to help you. What literary device is Bradbury, the author, using? So I'm going to tell you, and so hopefully you're watching this video because I'm giving you half an answer. The literary device he's using here is personification. Clocks don't actually sing, right? And clocks don't have feelings. They can't be afraid. They don't know what's going on around them. They're mechanical. So this idea is they are being personified. So I want you to think about why, and I want you to think about what the effect is. So what does it do? What tone does it set, or what message does it communicate? Okay, so for example, it's making these mechanical things almost appear to be the residents of this house. They live there now. In the absence of people, the machines continue their routines. And so they behave using these personified actions. Okay, so find some evidence of that and discuss it in your answer. All right, number 3. So we have defined irony. So you should know irony, the opposite of what is expected. So what is ironic about the author's description of the house as having a mechanical paranoia? So again, here is some personification. Things that are machines cannot have human feelings like paranoia. So what is ironic about that? So think about how that is the opposite of what should be. And then number 4, what is the significance? So why is it important that there are these repeated references to rain throughout the story? Why does the author talk so much about rains? In fact, rain is referenced in the title. There will come soft rains. So think about why rain happens to come up repeatedly. What might it represent? Could it be a symbol of something? And why is that important? What does it add to the story? Or does it communicate as a message or as a tone? Perhaps we can pick up on a feeling that's coming from the speaker through this rain. All right, now Wednesday, you will see on our agenda that you've been asked to complete a Google Doc that is in the Google Classroom that is this SIFT chart. So SIFT is a reading strategy that allows you to sift, if you will, comb through the text for details that reveal an overall meaning. Okay, so it gives us a format for writing down our details that help us analyze. So SIFT stands for symbol, imagery, figurative language, and tone and theme. So what you're going to do is find 1 or 2, maybe 3 objects that you think are symbols. Put them in the text details box, and then explain over here what you think the effect is. So what is the intent for the audience? What does the author want the audience to experience or feel or understand? Meanings of these details, right? So here's an example. I said a moment ago, perhaps the rain was a symbol of something. So I could put rain under text details. It was raining in the morning. And later on, there are references to rain. Rain is in the title. Perhaps the effect of the repeated rain is to show that everything is dreary, that it's gray, and it's almost as if the world is crying. Okay, so maybe that's the effect. Maybe the meaning is deeper. Maybe it's about how nature continues on, even in the absence of people. Maybe. Okay, so that's an example of what you'll do for symbol. Imagery, those words and phrases that appeal to the senses. Go back and find some text details that are examples of imagery. So here's one right here in paragraph 48. The empty chairs faced each other between the silent walls, and the music played. So this is definitely visual, something that I can picture, two empty chairs facing each other while music plays. But I can also almost hear it because they use the word silence and the word music played. So the empty chairs faced each other between the silent walls, and the music played. So there's this contrast of silence and music playing that feels very empty to me. There's no one there to enjoy the music or experience the music. So I would put the quote over here as my example of imagery. And then in this box, I would explain that it emphasizes the emptiness, how out of place the music is in this otherwise silent room. So you go back and find some other examples of imagery, put them in here and explain. Figurative language. So these are things like personification and metaphors and similes. So I am looking. Here we go. Let's see. This one's a little bit harder. I was not prepared, so I probably should have been. Oh, here we go. The fire crackled up the stairs. I'm in paragraph 55. It fed upon Picassos and Matisses in the upper halls like delicacies, baking off the oily flesh, tenderly crisping the canvases into black shavings. So it's personification is the figurative language being used here. Fire is being personified as if it is human, and it's eating the art as if they are delicacies. They're like extra special treats because they're Picasso and Matisse. And it's as if they're cooking them to their own perfect crispiness so that they can enjoy them even more. The house is almost cannibalizing itself here. It is feeding off of the art that was the people, right? They named people Picasso. It fed on Picasso and Matisse. So it's almost as if the fire that is now in this house is eating what are the people, or what should have been people in this home. So personification, to give this idea that the house is feeding on itself. The fire is eating the house. Okay, and you have to read the story to understand more. So hopefully you've already read. Now, tone and theme. So tone is the attitude of the speaker. Remember, it's not how you feel as the reader. It's how the speaker, the person telling the story, the author or the narrator, their attitude about something. They have an attitude about this house and about the fact that it is empty and that there are no people here and that other things are continuing on outside the house, like rain and fire and other things that are living but mechanical. So, what is the attitude of all this mechanical life? And I say life with air quotes, even though you can't see me. What is the attitude about that? And then lastly, now that we know that that's kind of the topic and that's the attitude about the topic, what is the message? What is the author trying to tell us about what happened here, or about mechanical things, or about people, or about destruction? All right, you guys. So as I said, you're not doing the writing prompt at the bottom, but you do need to do this check your understanding in a Google Doc, and it is due to the Google Classroom. So It's listed either under Thursday or Friday in the Google Classroom. So in a Google Doc, you will write a paragraph in which you describe the author's message. So Ray Bradbury's message in There Will Come Soft Rains. So it's asking you not just to tell me what you think the theme is, but describe it. Okay. And then answer this question. How is that message, that theme, conveyed through literary elements and tone? This question is asking you essentially to write a literary analysis paragraph, just like we have been doing. So you've already written 2, and so this will be your 3rd. Basically, it's a paragraph that's going to start with a statement like, in Ray Bradbury's short story, There Will Come Soft Rains, the theme of blank is conveyed through his use of, maybe you'll say personification. Maybe you'll say symbolism and tone. Okay, and then you're going to provide evidence to support your response. So in a Google Doc, you will write a paragraph. Please make sure it's formatted correctly. Formatting was explained in the video for 1.15a, so you can go back and watch that video again if you need to understand how to format your paper. All right, you guys, that is it for this week's Edpuzzle video. Please go back and read the story if you haven't already. Respond to the returning to the text questions so that you'll be ready for our discussion, and then complete the SIFT chart. There's already a Google Doc in the Google Classroom, as well as the Check Your Understanding and responding to the discussion question in the Google Classroom. And I will see you in our live synchronous session. Thank you.